So I recently received my copy of this, and by far, this is the fastest and easiest way to learn D&D. In fact, maybe you don't need any of the Dungeons & Dragons books. You could just play Shadowdark. So I really do love this game, Shadowdark, and so far we've used it for one-shots and short adventures. I don't know that for large campaigns if it'll ever replace a more robust version of D&D for my group, but this is a great game, and it's a great way to get started with D&D because it is a succinct, easy-to-read version of the game that gives you the fundamentals, and it's a great way to get started. In fact, back in 1983, I started with what was called the Basic Set. And now, most people knew Dungeons & Dragons as these hardcover books that were actually advanced Dungeons & Dragons. However, most of us didn't start with AD&D. A lot of us started with either the 1974 original version or one of the 3 basic sets that were available at the time because it was an easier entry point and it was a streamlined version of the rules that helped you get started. So ultimately, what's my point? You can start with a streamlined version of the rules and then add complexity later after you learn what it is you really like about D&D and what kind of play style you and your friends want to embrace at your table. Now, personally, I think that one piece of advice is so useful that you could stop the video here and be satisfied that you clicked on it. However, I'm going to give you 10 things I love about Shadowdark to either convince you to play Shadowdark or to take what you like about those 10 things and implement them into whatever version of D&D you are currently playing. So number 1, Shadowdark is exceptionally well written. And when I say well written, I don't mean wordy or flowery or overly academic. I mean concise and almost expertly executed in how succinct it is, which makes it so much easier to digest and learn and use at the table because it's that precise. Now, if you know anything about Shadowdark already, you've probably heard that they track torches in real time, that each torch lasts an hour of real time. Now, when I first read this, I thought it was kind of gimmicky, and I didn't know how well it would play out at the table, and I didn't think I would like it. But after playing the game several times, I love it. I think it's a great addition to the game, and it really ramps up the tension because you have to pay attention to your timer, and inevitably, at some point, you are going to get distracted and forget about your torch timer, and your torch is going to run out, and you're left in the dark. Now, years ago, I got this hourglass as a gift, and at the time, I was like, cool aesthetic, but what am I going to do with it? The answer, Shadowdark. We use this as our torch timer, and I love it. And that leads to our next point, which is attack the light. Now, this isn't a specific rule, it's more just Dungeon Master advice. The idea that one of the ways monsters can threaten characters is not just by attacking them and trying to impede their progress by combat, but attacking the light. They can hit and run, they can douse the characters with water or come up with some sort of trap that's designed to eliminate the light source. And this becomes a mindset for the style of play, that you're constantly trying to drive the players into darkness. In one way or another, the monsters are conspiring to use the darkness to their advantage. And that gives you another way to raise the stakes. Combats are not just about hit points or movement, they become about other things than just the fight itself. Now, if you want to implement this in Pathfinder or 5th edition, you just have to remember that there are actual rules for dark vision, that dark vision isn't the same as seeing with a light source. Check out the rules, they're different. Then give all your monsters advantage whenever they're fighting in darkness. And that way your monsters literally have advantage regardless of whether or not the player characters have dark vision. And you can still attack the light. The next thing I really like is the class and level design. In older editions of the game, you often got what were called dead levels, where you level up and you get more hit points, but you don't get any new abilities or anything different other than more hit points. But Shadowdark remains faithful to its old school feel, but still gives players some unique ability every time they level up. Here we're looking at the fighter, and you can see that there's a different thing you can get at every level, and there's only 10 levels. So for me, I would much rather have 10 levels of interesting things instead of having 20 levels, but half of those levels being kind of boring. The next thing I love about Shadowdark is the roll to hit magic system and the fact that it doesn't use spell slots. Now, I love playing spellcasters, but I've never been a fan of Vancian magic, the spell slot system that we're used to in almost every D&D game. And Shadowdark does away with that. You instead roll for success. Every spell you cast, you roll to see if you succeed, and if you do succeed, you can cast that spell again. However, if it fails, then you can't use that spell again for the rest of the day. That eliminates tracking spell slots, and it makes for a much more exciting and somewhat unpredictable magic system that I really enjoy. Now, the next thing on the list is not unique to Shadowdark, but it's exploration turns. In older versions of D&D, exploration turns was actually a common practice, also called dungeon turns. And this is where you, like combat, you have your turn, and then another player has their turn and so forth. And what this does is it helps organize exploration play. So when you're moving through the dungeon, each of you takes a turn. Now, Shadowdark doesn't specify how long an exploration turn is, but traditionally, you usually track dungeon turns in minutes. So instead of 6-second combat turns, you have 6-minute dungeon turns. This makes it much easier to run dungeon exploration as theater of the mind. Also helps make sure every player is getting involved, that the rogue is not the one dominating the dungeon exploration. This way, everybody's doing something, whether it's looking for traps, searching a room, bagging up the treasure, or trying to decipher the puzzle. Next on the list is treasure for experience points. Now, in other editions, they use gold for experience points, which is something I never really liked. However, the treasure for experience points is just slightly different, and it's enough different that I actually really like it. So whenever the players find treasure, the game master assigns an experience point value to it, either 1 point or 3 points. It's pretty simple. There's just categories of treasure. If it's a relatively minor treasure, you get 1 experience point. If it's something more interesting or more valuable, you get 3 experience points. And then if it's like a legendary magic item or an important quest item, you can get 10 experience points for it. Now, it's important to understand that when you level up from first to second level, you only need 10 experience points. But then from second level to third level, you need 20 experience points. And third level to fourth level, you need 30 experience points. And it continues to increase incrementally like that. And this is exactly what I mean by streamlining the game. For whatever reason, these smaller, simpler numbers make the game easier to implement at the table and just faster to run. I know it sounds silly that doing things at these smaller number values is that much more efficient than having thousands of gold pieces to track, but it is. It's just more efficient, and that's exactly what I mean when I say this game is streamlined and effective. Now, this XP system is explicitly designed for dungeon crawling. The idea of XP for treasure reinforces the goal that you need to explore the dungeon and retrieve the treasure, not necessarily fight all the monsters. However, if you did want to make a monster fighting game, you could certainly attach XP to monster slaying. You could also attach XP to narrative goals, and that's what I've done in my current campaign, is that I've created narrative goals with an XP value. That each time the players achieve one of the goals, they get 1 experience point. So using this system can incentivize whatever style of play you want. This clean, straightforward system of 10 XP to get to second level, 20 XP to get to third level. But then you make those experience points connected to the specific things you hope your players will accomplish. And that way you're rewarding the style of play that you want to see at your table. Now, the other thing I really like about Shadowdark is their carousing system. Carousing exists in 5th edition, and it's been in other versions too. But in Shadowdark, carousing becomes a great mini game where you spend money to carouse and roll on the carousing table, And then you get a random result, which gives you a narrative prompt to describe what kind of crazy night or weekend the players had. And then you get more experience points for the success of that roll. So the more money you spend, the higher value you can roll, and therefore the more experience you can earn by partying in town. What I love about that is it creates this pulp fantasy feel like Conan or Falfred and the Grey Mouser, where they raid a dungeon, they get the treasure, and then they spend it all until they're broke and have to do it all over again. The next thing on the list is monster design. And what I love about Shadowdark monster design is that the monsters all have at least one unique ability. However, they don't have half a dozen unique abilities. So this really hits a sweet spot where the monsters are more interesting than a lot of old school monsters, but they're not overworked like some of the monsters in 5th edition or Pathfinder. And I just really like that sweet spot. It just works for me. And number 10 on the list is Best of Both Worlds. Because Shadowdark takes the newest version of Dungeons & Dragons and distills it down into its old school bones. And then it resurrects those bones with modern design sensibilities and modern layout. It really becomes a great entry point for the hobby. So if you've never played Dungeons & Dragons before, this is a great way to get started because it's so familiar to 5th edition that once you learn how to play Shadowdark, you can easily graduate to 5th edition or to Pathfinder 2nd edition or any other version of D&D that you're interested in playing. And that's why I say Shadowdark is the best way to learn Dungeons & Dragons. So what do you think? Let me know in the comments below. What is your D&D story? Are you new to all this? Then I think Shadowdark could be the game for you. Are you an experienced gamer? Then let me know. How did you get started with Dungeons & Dragons? What version did you start playing, and what version do you play now? In fact, let me know how you teach new people how to play, because that's what this channel is all about, is getting people started in this hobby, helping people learn how to play Dungeons & Dragons and how to have more fun at this excellent and exciting hobby that we all love. And if you want more great D&D content, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to check out my newest video, there's a link here. And there's also a link to one of my most popular playlists. And thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time in the Dire Den.